inspirations, history research, and that stems from my time working in the library and my love of being in the library and looking stuff up. And even when I was a real little girl, I was like around 4 years old, and my father, he had the traveling encyclopedia, salespeople come to the door, and my father bought a Collier's encyclopedia that came with this set for kids called the Junior Classics of 10 books, incredibly wonderful books that I would read over and over. But, I'd get an assignment at school, and he would pull out the book and open it up, and you could learn something about it. When I started taking ballet lessons, we looked it up, and, I remember that picture of Maria Tallsheaf in there, and how, wow, she was gorgeous. I loved her. So there's that love of history and learning and researching and being comfortable with the pile of books around me. And, of course, today that sort of translates into more online time than book time, but there's still the books. So when I was getting into my last semester in the MFA program, and there's a big problem with people going to these creative writing programs is they graduate and they go through a writing block. And they stop writing for some forever, and some for 6 months, a year before they can pick it up again. And so I was thinking of ways of overcoming that. And one was to come up with a project, a long-term project that I could start in my last semester and it will carry me through. Well, that's when I started working on the leper book. And so I started doing research and started getting information and finding the people involved. And then the researcher just took over. I go, wow, this is fascinating stuff. I just wanted to learn more about these people who lived in this tiny place. So that carried me through for three and a half years. But I didn't have to worry about what I was going to write about. So, poems are short. You write one and go, okay, what's next? And for some people, it's not a problem. I think for most poets, it's not really a problem. What are you going to write about next? But for me, it was. I didn't want to keep writing about myself. The thing with poets, they always start off writing about yourself. Write about what you know about yourself. And at that time, I'd written some about I didn't want to just keep going into that, rehashing my life. And I want to write about different things, my thoughts and things, and other people. So I got into that, and I really, flowed along. And anytime I didn't know what to write about, I would go back to the research. I go back to the people, or I find out what is going on in the world in this time frame. With the Outcast, which was originally titled Clackers and Bells, and wound up being, which, I like that title better, but it wasn't a title that sold the manuscript. So I called it, so it's now the Outcasts, or Outcast without the, as my editor wants. And so wow, 1905 to 1921 was such a time of chaos and change. It was a time of World War I. It was a time of the sinking of the Lusitania. It was a time of the influenza epidemic, time of unionizing going on. It was, all that is the chaos around unions coming up, the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire in New York that killed 147 women, and the Great Molasses Disaster of 1918. These are all these things that are going on in this world that these people are isolated from, except what they're reading in the newspaper. And they didn't have newspaper, they did have this outlet. And just this time, and you have these people on this literally rock in the ocean, where you could see other islands. And it's almost as though you can walk across Yeah, some of them, two of them are really close. Cuttyhunk is there, and you can see the houses on Cuttyhunk where people live. But it's a world away for these people who are so incredibly isolated. And that whole thing of leprosy is the biggie of isolation and fear and stigma. And, since the Bible, yeah, and in that time, and there's this one poem I have on Moses and his sister Miriam, and I think it's called Miriam Badmouths Moses. And her punishment was God made her into a leper and sent her out into the wilderness. Yeah, so this whole thing of being sent outside. And my original title, Clackers and Bells, came from, in Middle Ages, lepers were forced into walking with either a clacker, which are these wooden things that bang and make a clacking noise, or they had bells, so that other people would know that they were close by and can stay away. This announcing their arrival. Stay away, stay away, stay away is what that sound was saying. Because there was such a fear. So people didn't know how it was transmitted. So it was so ugly. It was so disfiguring. What it does to people, and they lose their fingers and toes. They lose the cold areas of their body, so the nose shrinks up. The cartilage just totally gets reabsorbed into the body, so they lose their noses, and their lips sometimes get eaten away. And so it's unimaginably horrifying. And I think we all creative people, have times in your lives where you feel like an outcast, an outsider. I felt like I was an outsider in my extended family. I was like the black sheep of the family. And due to all this stuff that go into my father's side of the family. So I wasn't accepted because I was on my father's side of the family, because his father had a second wife, and he had 2 children, she had 2 children, and that was the favored side, was her side. So my father and his sister were like outcasts in the family, and therefore their children were outcasts. And so it's like, this whole thing of not belonging, and not belonging. And I think but I think that's true of many creative people, that you view the world on a different level than other people. It's almost like you're somewhere else. Your perspective is a bit off, and you're seeing things differently, you're perceiving things differently, and that makes you different. And you feel that, especially when you're growing up, and it's really easy to feel different. Yeah.